This movie was a great fit, but it most definitely needed some alterations. Hello everyone, I'm author R.L. Raintree. This is Reels and Reads, where I give honest reviews and occasional spoilers. The Devil Wears Prada 2 is definitely worth the wait, a 20-year wait, but it really should have punched a little bit harder when it comes to the subject matter. Now remember, this is 20 years old, so the last time we saw Andy, she was on a moral high ground and on a quest to become a journalist. Miranda was never going to leave the world of fashion. But what's happened in the world of fashion in the past 20 years? What's happened in the world of journalism in the past 20 years? Well, immediately this film shows us what happens to the world of journalism as Andy is losing her job while winning an award for her work working at a newspaper. Now, I know what you're thinking. Who the hell reads a newspaper? Exactly. In 20 years, we have lost newspapers. We have lost magazines. Everybody reads online. In fact, things are so bad. There's an entire generation of people that are illiterate because they don't even read the articles. They just read these headings and the titles, and then they do 20-minute TikTok videos about the subject, knowing absolutely nothing about what's going on. In fact, we get our news from social media, and that definitely should have been something that they included in this film. The main focus of the plot is Andy trying to save Miranda's career as the magazine is falling under. People aren't buying, obviously, hard copies of them. They're not reading the articles on the internet. Everybody's cutting budgets on the runway. I mean, we all see this happening, but they glossed over the real issues that both industries have. Again, with journalism, nobody's reading, and the people who are reading probably can't really read at all, and they're just reading the headlines. But with Miranda's industry, there's so much more they should have touched on, and they glossed over it. AI, for example, is doing fashion design. Why do I need a fashion designer when AI can do it for free? I mean, I would rather have one. I'm just telling you what people think. And what about fast fashion? That's a tongue twister. Fast fashion. Shein, Temu, Fashion Nova, you name it. There's a lot of fast fashion out there that has got people saying, you know what, I can look really, really good and not go broke. I don't need to do this. I don't need to spend all this money. And let's not forget that whole period on TikTok where we all found out from China, because of our current president, that a Birkin bag is less than $20 to make, but they're charging $20,000. For the love of God, there are fashion models walking down the runway in trash bags. Now, Miranda did mention how some of the models are overweight and plus size, which, of course, in her industry, that makes sense. Of course, she has to be careful about the way she talks to people now because of HR. That's on brand. But what they missed is the fact that people are walking down the runway in a bag that is made to look like a bag of Doritos or Lay's potato chips. That people are walking down the runway looking like homeless people because somehow that is chic. You all know what brands we're talking about. And Miranda doesn't address that at all in this film. The whole thing was about Miranda, whether or not she should retire, whether or not they can save the magazine. How can you save a magazine when you're coming up against fast fashion, you're coming up against a recession, you're coming up against AI, and you're coming up against the loss of support for journalism and creative media? They really missed an opportunity to drive that home. Now let's talk about the fashion. If you're my age or at least close to it, then you've heard the saying more than once. If you want to know the state of the economy, look at a woman's hemline. Because the hemlines in this film are very long, and I feel like whoever was in charge of the costume design knew exactly what they were doing. We're in a recession right now, and that recession should definitely have hit Runway Magazine, Miranda's entire industry. And I noticed that with the fashions, and I don't know if this was intentional or not, we had a lot of plaid, we had a lot of pleating, we had a lot of ankle length skirts. The body was fully covered up. We had a lot of those shirts. I don't know what they're called, but it's a full covered shirt, and then it has a built-in necktie or ascot or whatever you want to call it. Even Nigel was wearing an ascot. And this is a sign of a recession. This is a sign that people are not purchasing luxury for a while. Things are going really, really bad. And the last time we saw this fashion was in the 80s during the Reagan era. So I thought that the costume design was brilliant in that it showed just how poor people really are. It also put a lot of fall and winter colors in the spring, another sign of recession. But here's the thing that I'm not entirely sure was intentional or not, but it was definitely distracting. The fabrics looked really cheap. I don't know what the budget was for the film. I don't know if they used actual fashion designers, but I couldn't help but notice that Miranda's outfits were very gaudy and not Miranda's style at all. I noticed that some of the fabrics are very thin, very cheap. For example, there's a scene where Andy is going to the Hamptons and she's wearing a color block oversized dress, and it looks like it came from Timu. Not because of the design, not because of the color palette, but because of the fabric itself looked really cheap. And again, I'm trying to figure out, was that intentional by the costume designer to show how things are, or did they really not have a good enough budget for a film about fashion to use quality fabrics? And speaking of how industries have changed over 20 years, and speaking of quality as well, I couldn't help but notice that this film is an accurate representation of how the film industry is struggling. And by struggling, I mean the quality of the cinematography. There's a scene when they're in Italy and we get a scenic image of the entire town that they're in, and it was highly grainy. It almost felt like a sitcom where they input some stock footage of a city, say like New York, and you can tell that it's not actually in New York. They just took some B-roll footage and plugged it in. That's what it looked like. It was incredibly grainy. The lighting was off. In fact, that was the way the entire film looked. Poor lighting, very, very grainy. I don't know if they didn't have the proper filters, but even when it came to the makeup, it looked low budget. Anne Hathaway and Meryl Streep have aged beautifully, and yet the makeup that they put on added another 10 years. You could see the creasing in the eyeshadow. You could see that the eyeliner was far too heavy, and some moments Miranda's eyeliner didn't even connect. And we're not even going to talk about Emily's wigs. They look like they came off of Timu, and she slept in them for a couple of months before she put them on her head. It was stiff. There was no movement. It was definitely stiff. And now I don't really care if a person has crow's feet. I don't really care if someone doesn't look as young as they did. What I care about is that it looked like this was filmed for streaming, and then it was stretched to fit film. And so this is something that was an ongoing issue over the past 20 years. Movies are being filmed darker. They're being filmed with poor cinematography, but they look magnificent on streaming, on your television at home. So it felt like whoever was in charge of the look of this film made it knowing that this was going to go to streaming in a couple of weeks, and they cared more about how it looked on streaming than how it looked on a big screen. And as a person who paid money to see this film, I felt cheated. It looked really low budget. You've got to understand, The Devil Wears Prada, the original, was magnificently lit. The colors were bright. Everything was crisp, and that was on film. So if digital has all of these technological advancements, why did this film look so bad? Now, before I get into the rating for this film, I want to talk about the controversy about the Asian character Jin Chao. Now, it's my understanding her character was supposed to be Chinese. I don't remember it actually coming up exactly what country she was from or where her family comes from. Now, I will say that I am Black. I am not Asian. I don't have a right to say whether or not this was offensive. I could definitely see how this was racially insensitive and stereotypical. The character is literally an Asian stereotype. She has low self-esteem. She rattles off her resume. She's frumpily dressed. She went to an Ivy League college or university. She's an overachiever. She fits that. She even has glasses. She fits that stereotype of the sidekick Asian character, female Asian character. We've seen it in House, MD. We've seen it everywhere. We've seen it. It's been played out. However, it is not lost upon me that this character is Andy's assistant, and everything that Jin Chao does, Andy has done as well. Only nowadays, people are getting Ivy League degrees to do what Andy did, and let's not forget the fact that Andy was white. She was never qualified to do the job, and I think that needs to be pointed out, that Andy was able to get that job without the qualifications, whereas Jin Chao, an Asian character, had to be overqualified to get a simple job as an assistant. So I felt like that was actually a plus, but then again, like I said, I'm not Asian. If Asian people are offended, I'm gonna ride with them on that one. But there are some other things I'd like to let you know, because you're not gonna know this unless you watch the film. There is another Asian character. In fact, there are three female Asian characters, none of whom are anything alike. They are completely different personalities, completely different areas of the Asian diaspora, and maybe that might change whether or not some people are offended or whether or not they find the character racist, or maybe it doesn't change it at all. We do have a character that plays Miranda's assistant, and she is an Asian Indian. Now, I can't help but notice that when it comes to the Asian community, they tend to leave out Indians. I don't know what that's about. Again, that's not a topic for me to discuss, but she is a very dark-skinned Asian Indian woman, and she plays Miranda's assistant. She is a person who was born to be Miranda's assistant. She has the attitude, she has the style, she has the flat affect. She is exactly the type of woman whom you would expect to work as Miranda's assistant and not get yelled at and not get fired. But here's a spoiler alert, and I'll say that again, spoiler alert, and let's count to 5. Lucy Liu is in this film, and she plays a billionaire, and she is absolutely positively nothing like any Asian stereotype I have seen before from any part of the diaspora. In fact, Lucy Liu plays a highly important character in this film. Without her, the ending falls apart. So I understand that Jin Chao's character is a highly stereotypical, but I caution people in not watching this film, because when they get there, they're going to realize that there is a full circle representation of Asian women in the fashion world. If anything, Black people should have been upset, because we know just how influential Black people are in the fashion world and continue to be and have always been, but never got credit for. And once again, we are not in this film. We are in this film as cameos. We're in this film as extras with a couple of, utterances like, oh my God, wow, why is this happening? That's about it. We don't have any character names. We don't have any character profiles like the Asian characters have. And do I need to tell you that there are no Hispanic people in this film? And if they are, they certainly aren't portrayed as Hispanic. So this film was never very inclusionary, and it wasn't very inclusionary in the original as well. But then again, this is the fashion industry. That is one of the biggest problems in the fashion industry. I don't find it very believable or very plausible that there are hardly any Black people in the room. But again, we're talking about the Asian characters and how the Asian community feels about how they are portrayed. I will support them and how they feel about the character, but that doesn't change the fact that they had, next to the white characters in this film, the most representation of any other ethnic group, and it was the most diverse representation at that. So maybe don't listen to all of the talk about it. Maybe go watch it yourself and decide if you still find it offensive. But again, it's not my place to tell you whether or not you should be offended. Let's talk about the rating. At one point, I was going to give it 2 stars because of everything I said, but ultimately, it is worth the watch. It is worth the money to go to the theater. I will tell you, though, I looked around the theater and I saw a lot of people had fallen asleep. I don't know if it's because, people are just tired these days, but a lot of people checked out because the beginning of the film is definitely a slow burn. Again, if they had focused on how things have changed in 20 years, I don't think people would have found it as boring. But once we got down to the central focus of the plot, things picked up and people woke up. So overall, I'm going to be a little bit more graceful, and I'm going to give this film 3 stars. The plot was there. They had a great idea. They just didn't commit to it. They just didn't punch it all the way home, and the cinematography was just absolutely atrocious. I dare say that if you watch this on streaming, you're going to have a much better experience, but it's definitely not a waste of your money to see it in theaters. So tell me what you thought of The Devil Wears Prada 2. First, let me know, what did you expect? What were you wanting to see in this film? And if you've seen it, let me know, did you get what you expected? How do you feel about these movies taking 20 years to come out with a sequel? I can tell you that while we watched the previews for The Devil Wears Prada 2, Practical Magic 2 looks like it's going to be one of those films that is going to be greatly disappointing. It feels like the people who make these films are doing money grabs instead of paying attention to precisely why these films became classics and why these films are so nostalgic and why we're asking for more. We're not asking for more because we can't get enough of the characters. We're asking for more because we want to see those characters in present day. And this was the perfect film to accomplish that with, but they just took their foot off the gas when it mattered most. Anyways, this has been Reels and Reads. I am author R.L. Raintree. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and thank you for watching.